Have you ever imagined what would happen if someone you trusted deeply betrayed you in a brutal way? And more importantly, what would you do when the weight of anger and disappointment became unbearable? This is the turning point in João's life. An ordinary man with big dreams saw his closest friendship turn into a nightmare. His best friend, the one he shared every moment with, stole the idea he loved most and tried to register it as his own. A cold and calculating betrayal that shook the foundations of his life. But the story doesn't end there. Instead of letting himself be consumed by anger, João made a choice. The choice to move forward. The journey of overcoming that he began, facing the shadows of his own pain and resentment, teaches us much more than simple victories or defeats. It teaches us about faith, forgiveness, and the inner strength that we all carry, often without knowing it. If you are in a moment of pain or struggle, or if you have ever experienced betrayal, this story is for you. It will touch your heart, stir your emotions, and, who knows, change your outlook on life. Before continuing with this story that will transform your view on overcoming, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and follow more stories like this one. Here, we share life lessons that really matter. Let's go on this journey of reflection and learning together. Now follow the journey of João, a man who overcame one of the biggest betrayals of his life and transformed his pain into a lesson in faith, forgiveness, and growth. It all started with a smile of trust. João and Lucas met when they were still young in high school, and since then they have been inseparable. They grew up together, supported each other in the most difficult moments, and celebrated life's victories together. It was the kind of friendship that seemed unbreakable. But as happens in many stories, life had something unexpected in store for them. One day, João had an idea. It was something great, something that could change his life. He shared this idea with Lucas, believing that, as always, his friend would be his greatest support. They talked for hours, exchanging ideas, laughing at the possibilities. There was nothing left to hide. It was a genuine friendship where trust reigned. However, what João didn't know was that Lucas had other plans. Without any warning, Lucas began to act strangely. He distanced himself from João, seemed more withdrawn and reserved. At first, João didn't care much. Everyone has their moments, right? But, as time went by, something in Lucas's behavior began to bother him. One day, when João looked for an idea that he and Lucas had discussed, he was surprised. Lucas had registered the idea as if it were his own, even trying to register the name of the project and patent it. The betrayal was not only in the action, but in the broken trust of a friendship that João believed to be unbreakable. What he felt at that moment was something difficult to describe. Pain, anger, and a feeling of emptiness. The friend, whom he considered a brother, was now trying to take something that had been born from his mind. And the worst part, with total coldness. The feeling of loss was devastating, but there was still a more important question for João. He needed to understand what motivated Lucas to do this. They had been through so much together, and this betrayal made no sense at all. What was his friend looking for with this? What had he lost in that moment that made him act this way? There were no easy answers. João found himself in a whirlwind of emotions, not knowing how to act. What would he do now? How could he rebuild the trust that had been so easily destroyed? After discovering that Lucas had registered João's idea as if it were his own, the pain was not only due to the act itself, but also due to the realization that, behind the friendship, something much darker was happening. João, with a heavy heart and a mind full of questions, decided to confront Lucas. It was a tense day, a conversation he never imagined he would have to have. He called his friend, and the tone of the conversation was cold from the beginning. There was no longer the familiarity that had previously filled the silences between them. Only a tense silence. as if the friendship had disappeared overnight. Lucas tried to justify his actions, saying that he was also seeking success, like everyone else. He talked about the difficulties he faced, as if that were a valid explanation for having stolen João's idea. "You should understand, João. It's the market. Opportunities wait for no one," he said, as if he were trying to convince not only João, but himself that he was doing the right thing. João, on the other hand, felt the weight of a profound betrayal, not only from a friend, but from someone with whom he had shared his greatest dreams and his greatest insecurities. What Lucas could not understand was that success meant nothing without honesty, without respect for the other person. In this confrontation, João's anger and disbelief grew, but at the same time, he felt something stronger emerging within him, a determination. He could not allow everything he had built to be destroyed by a lie, not only because of the business idea he had, but because of the loyalty he believed he had invested in that friendship. He asked himself, "Why am I here, trying to understand someone who clearly does not respect me?" But he knew that this was not the time to make an impulsive decision. It was time to reflect, to analyze everything he had experienced with Lucas until then, and most importantly, to understand what this meant for his future. With a heavy heart, João decided that he needed some time for himself. He could not take any action while he was filled with anger. But the hardest part would be what came next. The impact this betrayal would have not only on his career, but on his personal life. He knew he would have to walk away from Lucas, but how could he walk away from someone who, for so many years, had been considered more than a friend? He was like a brother? Doubt still lingered in his mind, but one thing was certain. He could no longer trust this man who now represented everything he didn't want to be. After the confrontation with Lucas, João found himself alone at an emotional crossroads. He walked away as he needed to, but that didn't mean his mind and heart were at peace. In that solitude, thoughts began to take over. He tried to understand what had happened, questioning his own friendship, the decisions he had made over the years, and the times when he had missed warning signs. How could someone so close to him have done this to him? How could someone he loved and trusted be capable of destroying something so valuable in the name of ego and ambition? Every night, João went to bed with a whirlwind of thoughts. He thought about how generous he had been with Lucas, how he had shared his most intimate dreams and deepest hopes. How could he have been so naive? This feeling of loss and betrayal was compounded by the pain of having lost a part of himself in the process. Sadness, anger, frustration, everything mixed together in such an intense emotional state that he didn't know how to deal with it. But little by little, something began to change inside him. He knew he couldn't continue to suffer like this. Something inside him was crying out for transformation. He needed to rebuild himself, to understand that despite the pain, it couldn't define his life. It was then that on one of those nights of introspection, João remembered something important. He thought about all the difficult moments he had faced in life, the challenges that had shaped him, the moments of loss and pain that had, in some way, taught him valuable lessons. Life had always given him a way to move forward, to get back on his feet, to fight for a purpose greater than himself. And this moment would be no different. John couldn't let Lucas's betrayal be the end of his journey. It had to be just a part of it, a life lesson, something that would strengthen him in the future. He knew he had to forgive. Not because Lucas deserved it, but because he, John, needed to move on in peace. And it was in this process of reflection, amidst the pain and solitude, that João found a strength he didn't know existed within himself. True overcoming, he realized, was not in fighting Lucas or seeking revenge. It was in moving forward with his own life, seeking what was right for him, regardless of other people's actions. João's faith, already present in his life for a long time, now became the force that drove him to believe that he could rebuild everything that had been destroyed. He needed to trust in the process of transformation and let forgiveness free him from the bonds of anger. Only then could he finally move forward. After days of deep reflection, João realized that the only way to overcome Lucas's betrayal was to take control of his life again. He could no longer allow anger and disappointment to dominate his thoughts. Lucas's betrayal had caused a great shock, but he knew that he could not let it define his story. He needed to be more than a victim of this situation. João decided to act. He couldn't just let the project he loved so much be usurped without doing anything. The first thing he did was seek legal help to understand how he could reverse the situation. During this process, João was faced with the harsh reality that things would not be simple. His friend, now ex-friend, had registered the idea as his own and was trying to use it formally, as if it were the fruit of his own work. However, João knew that, in essence, that idea was his. He had worked on it, dreamed about it, dedicated nights of effort and creativity. It could not be taken away, just like that. So João decided to fight. But not in the way many people would expect. He didn't want revenge. He didn't want to destroy Lucas's life. He wanted to get back what was his, fairly, and show that integrity and truth would prevail. And above all, he wanted to make sure that this story did not define him as someone who had no faith in himself. The quest for justice was not just a matter of wanting recognition for his work. It was, above all, a matter of self-respect and the need to show himself that he would not let himself be beaten down. The decision to act, at that moment, was the turning point in João's journey. He knew that the fight would not be easy, and that he would have to distance himself even further, from Lucas perhaps forever. But this would be the only way to free himself from the feeling of helplessness that had accompanied him since the day he discovered the betrayal. The journey ahead would be long, but João was determined to follow his own path. And most importantly, he was ready to start over. To show the world and himself that his faith and his purpose did not depend on anyone else. He knew that, somewhere along the way, he would find something more important than momentary success. He would find his true self, strengthened by adversity, guided by integrity and the courage to move forward, regardless of the obstacles. The process of claiming the idea began to take concrete form. João, supported by his lawyer, took the necessary steps to contest Lucas's record. Each document sent, each meeting scheduled, seemed to be a step closer to the truth. But the tension between him and Lucas only increased. Lucas, for his part, did not show the slightest bit of remorse. He simply tried to justify his actions with the same coldness as before, as if he were acting within his rights. This only increased João's pain, because he knew that his friend had not only stolen his idea, but had also distorted the story so that his version was the only one that mattered. What began as an attempt to resolve the situation simply and honestly soon turned into an emotional battle. Every time John spoke to Luke, he felt that no matter how hard he tried to remain calm, there was something inside him that grew angry with each lie, each new attempt at manipulation by Luke. There was something John still didn't understand. Why was Luke, such a close friend, behaving so destructively? What was the reason behind all of this? He could no longer find answers that made sense. But as the days passed, John began to realize that the real struggle was not in Luke's words or actions. The struggle was within himself. John would need to win this battle within himself, in his heart, first and foremost. He would have to decide whether anger and the desire for justice would consume him, or whether he would take control and finally find peace. He knew that he was stronger, that his faith was stronger than ever, and that he could overcome any obstacle. But the anger was still there, fighting against his soul, trying to overshadow his clarity of purpose. The moment to confront Lucas then arrived. They met in an office, where João's lawyer presented all the documents that proved that the idea had been registered by João first. The tension was palpable. Lucas was sitting there with a defensive posture, as if nothing had happened. But what João felt at that moment was not a desire to scream, to accuse, or to seek revenge. On the contrary, He felt a deep calm. What he needed at that moment was only justice. He knew that he had the right to be heard and to have his idea recognized. However, more importantly than that, he knew that this would be the last time he would have to face Lucas. After this, he would take a new path, where the energy that had previously been directed to anger would be channeled into something higher, his own transformation. When the meeting ended, with the promise that the situation would be resolved legally, João left that place with a mixed feeling of relief and reflection. He had not only won the legal battle, but something much more valuable. He had managed to look at the past with more clarity, without resentment, without the desire to destroy. From that moment on, he knew that the fight had been more about who he was becoming than about what he had lost. After resolving the legal issue, João found himself at a new point in his journey. He was no longer consumed by anger or the need to seek justice in a personal way. What had previously seemed like an endless confrontation was now just a part of his past. João knew that, even though the situation had been resolved on paper, he still needed to do a much deeper internal work. Forgiveness. This was something he had been putting off, something he knew he needed to face, but to which he still refused to give himself completely. How could he forgive someone who had betrayed him in such a cold and calculating way? How could he let go of someone who still caused him so much pain? It was during an ordinary day, as he reflected on life and his next steps, that something inside him changed. He realized that he couldn't move forward while carrying the weight of anger. Lucas's anger wouldn't change anything, wouldn't turn back time, and wouldn't bring anything good. It would only keep him stuck in the past, in an endless cycle of suffering and emotional exhaustion. As much as forgiveness seemed impossible, he understood that the only way to find true peace was to release what he felt. John then did something he never imagined he would do. He prayed for Luke. He prayed not for Luke to be punished, but for him to find peace. He prayed not for his former friend to be punished, but for him to understand the weight of his actions and, who knows, one day to redeem himself. John was not doing this for Luke, but for himself. He needed to free himself from that bitterness, so that he could move forward with the life he was rebuilding. This act of forgiveness did not mean that he was forgetting what had happened, but it did mean that he was freeing himself from the pain and hurt that situation had caused him. It was at that moment, when he surrendered to this decision, that John began to feel true freedom. He no longer felt the weight of anger on his shoulders. The pain was still there, but now it was part of his story, no longer as an open wound, but as a scar that had shaped him. He knew that by forgiving, he was not saying that what Lucas had done was right, but he was allowing peace to enter his heart. And most of all, he was allowing himself to move forward toward a future that, although uncertain, was full of possibilities. João now knew that forgiveness was not a gift he was giving Lucas. It was a gift he was giving himself. And for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace with himself, ready to start his life over again, with renewed confidence in his ability to overcome any obstacle. The journey of forgiveness, which seemed to be the hardest part, became the key to the true transformation of his life. After forgiveness, something new began to be born within João. He was no longer the same man who had been betrayed by his best friend. He had overcome the worst, but more importantly, he had found strength within himself that he never imagined he had. Over the next few months, João dedicated himself even more to his business, now with a renewed vision. The loss he had felt no longer defined his path, but rather the drive to become a stronger, more determined version of himself. He knew that success did not come from external circumstances, but from his ability to hold on, even in the most difficult moments. Over time, the project that had been stolen by Lucas began to take shape again. João, with his new perspective, brought a renewed passion to his work. With each new idea, each new challenge, he felt that he was closer to something much greater. He began to see difficulties not as barriers, but as opportunities for growth. And as time went on, He also began to realize that the true reward was not in financial success or external validation, but in the satisfaction of knowing that he had overcome a painful situation with honor and dignity. And it was in this moment of rebuilding that something extraordinary happened. João received an unexpected message from an investor interested in his project, who had been impressed by the innovation and determination he had shown even after the crisis. The idea, which had previously seemed like a simple dream, was now taking shape into something much bigger, with the support of people who believed in the real value of what he had created. But the most significant thing of all was that João, looking back, knew that this success was the result of his resilience, of his courage in facing pain and moving forward, without ever giving up on what he believed was right. He now understood that overcoming adversity did not come only from victory itself, but from the journey that transformed him along the way. He had lost something important, but in the end, he had gained much more. A deep understanding of what really mattered in life. True victory was not in winning a prize or achieving a position of success, but in being able to get back up, to learn from the falls, and to move forward with a clear and firm purpose. João knew that life was not about avoiding storms, but about learning to navigate them. Now, stronger than ever, João was ready to take the next steps on his journey, knowing that no matter what happened, he would always have the ability to start over. No matter the adversity, because in his heart, he had found something much greater than any problem or challenge, the unshakable confidence that true transformation came from within. Months passed, and João continued to focus on his journey, but something still bothered him. Although he had found inner peace and had started his life over, there was one thing that did not leave him completely at peace. The fact that Lucas was still out there, living with the consequences of his own choice, and João never had the chance to truly understand in depth what had led him to betray his trust. Deep down, he knew that forgiveness did not mean forgetting, and he felt that something still needed to be resolved between them, more like a closing of a cycle than anything else. It was then that, in a twist of fate, João met Lucas in a local coffee shop. The meeting was unexpected, but the impact was immediate. The old friend was visibly different, thinner, with a lost look and a countenance of someone who had faced his own demons. They looked at each other for a long time before Lucas broke the silence. "I know I don't deserve your attention, John. But for some reason, something inside me told me that you're the last person I need to talk to. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've been trying somehow to understand why I did what I did," Lucas said in a tone that John would never have imagined hearing from his former friend. John felt a tightness in his chest. The anger, which had seemed so strong and persistent before, now seemed distant. He remembered all the times when Lucas had been like a brother to him, the dreams they'd shared, the laughter, the confessions. Now, there, in front of him, was someone who had lost his way, someone who had allowed himself to be consumed by greed and fear. John realized in that moment that he no longer needed answers, not to heal himself. He had already healed himself. Instead of retaliating or accusing, João took a deep breath and, with the same calm that had guided him on his journey of overcoming, replied, "I don't know what happened, Lucas, but I know that we can't live by dwelling on our mistakes. I was stronger for learning from what happened and not for staying stuck in the past. It's not about what you did, it's about what I learned. Maybe, if you ever want to find your own peace, you have to face yourself and make peace with what's inside you." Lucas was silent for a moment, seeming to absorb each word. Then, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, he looked into João's eyes, and with a sincerity that touched him deeply said, "I understand, João, and in some ways, that's already more than I deserve." João didn't know what the future held for the two of them, but in that moment, he felt like he had finally come full circle. He no longer needed an explanation. The forgiveness he offered Lucas was no longer a burden. It was a liberation for both him and Lucas. Now, they could both move on, with their own stories and their own lessons. At the end of this journey, João not only overcame a betrayal that seemed to be the end of everything he knew, but he also found something much deeper and more powerful, the true strength that comes from forgiveness. He didn't need anyone's approval, not even a sincere sorry from Lucas, to move on. The peace that seemed unattainable came from within him when he decided that anger could no longer rule his life. João's new beginning was not easy, but it was essential for his growth. Each step he took was a conscious choice not to let bitterness define him, and he became a stronger and more serene man because of it. Have you, who are watching this story, ever experienced something like this? A situation that seems impossible to overcome? Have you ever felt anger and pain consume you, and wondered if it would be possible to find peace again? John's lesson is clear. True transformation comes from within. And as difficult as it may be, when we decide to forgive and move on, we make room for a new beginning, for a richer, more fulfilling life. Now the question is, what would you do in his place? Would you continue to feed the pain, or would you choose to move forward with courage and faith in search of something greater? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like it, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of overcoming and transformation. The path to forgiveness and true strength is long, but it starts with a simple step. Let's go on this journey together.